Morning, everyone. It's Thursday, January 18th. This morning, we're going to hear from sponsors of a few bills. And then we're going to talk, we have another charter change to take on, and then we're going to talk about the recent Institute on Taxation Economic Policy report. And then 80th reminder after lunch is the e-board, and then we are hosting a four-committee joint hearing. So ask everyone, would be lovely if you could join and watch the e-board either virtually or in person. But regardless, please make sure that you are back in the committee room for the conversation.
Where will the joint meeting be at?
We're hosting it here
Using Zoom?
using the Zoom.
Yeah.
We will not invite.
In person.
But
Tom Cavell will be in person here.
Oh,
Mhm.
good.
Yes.
And the e-board one, where's that?
the e-board's in the governor's ceremonial office.
And are we allowed to be in there standing around the?
Absolutely. Yes. Standing awkwardly is always encouraged in the governor's ceremonial office.
Okay.
So we do
One
that.
choice.
The chairs are very uncomfortable. I don't blame the governor for that, though. So with that, we are going to get started. Representative Buss, would you like to join us? Thank you. H 757.
For the record, my name is Tesha Buss. I'm the rep for Windsor 5, which is Plymouth, Reading, and Woodstock. And since both of these bills sort of talk to the same topic, I have decided to just talk about what brought me to both of these bill presentations. So, privately owned and non-subsidized rental properties are critical to the source of housing in Plymouth, Reading, and Woodstock. The number of homes available for rent is decreasing, and the rents are increasing due to a number of trends. Properties that were previously rented are sold to new owners who have no interest in renting long-term. Multi-unit properties are being purchased and converted back to single-family homes. Properties are converted to short-term rentals, and investors buy rental properties, make needed rehabilitation, and then rent them at much higher rates. Local businesses are often unable to fill employees and to have employees fill vacancies due to the lack of housing. And many of our teachers travel 45 minutes one way to teach at our elementary and high schools. South Woodstock recently upgraded its sewer plant. Now the town of Woodstock is needing $30 million to upgrade its plant. We are likely to go to bond, purchase our private water system that has been in the Billings family since the 1800s. The best guess is that while the price tag is low, like around maybe 1 million, the estimate of deferred maintenance is challenging to assess. We have students from the Harvard Business School that's making this assessment. We are assuming 10 million right now. Twin Pines cannot build the 17 affordable units ready for construction that have been in the planning stages for many, many years because we do not have water due to the aged infrastructure from the private company. So it's a water pressure issue. During Hurricane Irene and during our latest round of flooding, there was a critical line that went out that goes underneath the Ottauquechee River. And to fix the pressure problem, we hooked fire hoses from 2 different hydrants to do this sort of makeshift pressure so that we could even just flush toilets. But then that brought PFAS into our water system. And so it's really important that we don't have another 10 days without water in our town. So while Twin Pines is back for a non-controversial conversion of a property for senior housing in our town, they are shy about large-scale projects because the last project, 1 block from my personal home, was in court for 10 years. Cash purchases of second homeowners and property acquired for short-term rentals have taken our local housing stock up, and we are now over 60% non-homestead ownership and growing every day. The town of Plymouth is in the upwards of 80%. Only the town of Reading has sort of relatively normal homestead rates. VHCB is a great program. And with the second home cash purchases since COVID, we rarely have real estate that qualifies for that program. And the rental market in our town is about 2,500 for a 2-bedroom apartment. And only does occasionally a studio or a 1-bedroom condo become available for sale that would meet VHCB's $300,000 home cap. So we do have a couple of shared equity homes in town, but they've been in place for a very long time. So we have people in desperate need of housing, and without VHCB, we only have VHIP's ADU program and the multi-unit programs available to assist our small scale and visible infill. And these are unique and valuable programs, but not always attractive to homeowners because the real estate value is so high that after construction, the rent amount, which is great for the renter, has no economy of scale for the property owner with only 1 or 2 units. So the HUD rental rate barely covers the owner's monthly debt service and to create the unit with little to nothing left for the property taxes and insurance. And towns like Woodstock do not have many sources of grant income because the wealth in the town is held by a few, but the demographics have changed in Woodstock far faster than our reputation. And a vast majority of homestead taxpayers receive income sensitivity now on their property taxes. To aid the construction of workforce housing, and knowing our housing crisis will not likely be aided soon by large development, a working group has been created to assist homeowners in becoming small-scale developers, and the following 2 bills would assist in those efforts. So H757 proposes a local options tax to add a surcharge on property values above 1 million. 30% would be kept at the state level for VHCB, and 70%, the town portion, would be restricted in use for only critical infrastructure needed to create workforce housing, though obviously it could potentially assist more than workforce housing, but it would be needed for it, and then also to create the workforce housing. And H758 updates 32 VSA 3836 to increase the value of the exemption from 75,000 to 125,000, and to have this adjust by rate of inflation using the Consumer Price Index. It increases the exemption for 5 years, from 3 years to 5 years, to be in line with VHIP's programs, and it also increases the amount of the time the unit is put into construction. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for outlining the problem and the solution. So it's comprehensive. To summarize all of those words into just a few, is this essentially a local option tax on property transfers?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's a very interesting and innovative idea. Yeah, Representative Hassan.
Interesting concept, interesting thing for us to work through. I've got a bill that I don't expect to go anywhere. But it's good for discussion, but it's maybe has a somewhat similar intent, which is to add it's basically a surcharge on homes over 5,000 square feet. They go to VHCB. And it, depending if the committee takes it up and if we settle on an amount, it could be substantial, but the issue is not so much directly related to yours, but it's the issue that there are forces out there that are forcing little people out of the little people, sorry.
I'm proud to be a little person.
Forcing some people out of the market and some builders out of the market. And in the case of houses over 5,000 square feet or on an upwards, also use, generally speaking, a whole lot of property for one little house. But anyway, so I commend you for bringing this in because it is something good for us to sort of work our way through.
Why did you settle on $1 million, Tish?
Well, we looked at a lot of the middle income housing prices in our town, and we kind of felt like once we got to $1 million, we went above the sort of middle income world. We didn't want to hurt our middle income folks. And we also felt that most of the property values in our town for commercial businesses were under $1 million, except for the ones downtown. And they're largely held by out-of-state investors.
Did you do any investigation of, statewide, how $1 million residential or $1 million properties are spread around the state? Are they spread evenly, or are they populated in just certain locales, or?
from just looking at the transfers of the last couple of years, it is pretty concentrated to certain localities.
Do you have any estimate on what that tax might bring into the town in revenue from some of these critical infrastructure projects?
You know, I didn't do a lot of historical research beyond basically the COVID years, but there are COVID years that this could bring in, you know, $750,000 to $1 million in potentially 1 year. If I'm reading it correctly, and that I may be wrong, but in looking at those transfers, there were a substantial. Well, last year when we were in session and we were talking about housing throughout on the floor, I would constantly receive my Zillow updates. And there was a period of time, there was not a single home available for sale under $1 million in our town. So if 40 transfer in a year, $1 million plus, that's significant. And it's hard for us to capture, like did meet with our listers. They say that they can only kind of adjust the NIMRIC software to get it to about 3.6 in value. So we're not even able to fully capture the taxable value that we have in the homes. And we have a lot of homes that have recently sold for $7 to $10 million.
Is that true just in Woodstock or Plymouth and Reading too?
Not so much in Plymouth, definitely. Reading has a developer that has a very wealthy person who owns a lot of real estate, but has not moved it in years upon years. But South Woodstock has a huge developer that also kind of has taken up a bunch of that real estate and also held it for a number of years.
And Reading is sort of like south Woodstock.
Reading is South Woodstock. I mean, it's 28 minutes away. Yeah,
I appreciate it.
28 minutes away.
Representative Beck.
So this could potentially set up a patchwork of property transfer tax rates across the state. Have you had any conversations with tax or the Realtors Association about, how is that implementable? Is that something that they could administer? Have you spoken with them at all?
I really have only spoken with some local realtors who, had some concern, but
Yeah.
they were also, I pointed out that the ability to have a lot more homes for them to transact should definitely do some balancing work.
Any other questions, anyone? Yeah,
I just want to
Representative.
say, I think this is an idea we should think about. It's bothered me for a long time that we've taken away the ability of local communities to raise money. Now they only have property tax. So this is one variant on that that I think could be useful. And I think we should leave the decision of what to do with that money up to the local authorities, which would probably be the select board in this case. But I think, anyway, I think it's a good idea. It's a restoring of some equity that we've taken away from local decision makers.
Just in case they ask me to chime in here.
I want to think about it.
I think there's a lot. I also, I think we need to talk to the tax department about if it's administratable, which is always a big question with anything new.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really interesting idea.
We could incorporate it into the study, ways local towns could raise revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Just to round this out, maybe you could have graduated, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4. But
It does graduate up. I did not go into detail about that.
thank you.
I apologize. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Representative Maslin. So it was 0.5% between $1 million and $2 million, 1% from 2 to 3, and 3% for 2 million and up.
Gooders.
Wait, 2%. Yes, thank you.
She was fact checking who had read.
No, see?
Can always count on Rep. Canfield for that one. Yes. Thank you. Really appreciate you talking about this bill. I believe you have another bill.
Yeah, so that was the exemption from, so this bill, this went into statute in 1961. I think the value back then was $15,000 in exemption for if you have created a dwelling unit or farm building. And so in 2003, I believe it was switched to 75,000. And then I moved it up in this bill to 125. And to have this adjust with inflation. And I did speak with PBR about this mechanism of using the consumer price index. And they would alert towns as to the change so that we wouldn't have to keep coming back every so many years to adjust to the value of inflation. And then I did increase the time to 5 years. So it went from 3 years. I put 5 years in so that it matched the VHIP multi-unit and ADU property length of time that you have to rent at HUD rates, which is extremely below market rent.
So what do? You exempt these properties from tax?
For up to the first 125,000 of the creation of that unit. So if you've created a one-bedroom apartment above a garage, and it costs you, 250,000 to do that because you built it from scratch, it would exempt that first 125,000.
And this is to do what? To encourage this?
To encourage, yes, to encourage more invisible infill. Most units are created around that amount. And so the town would make that exemption and they would opt to make that exemption. So it wouldn't be statewide, a town would opt into it as a way to encourage small scale development in their towns.
You mentioned farm buildings.
Right.
That was a part of the original bill in 1961, which I left in there because I love farmers and was a farmer myself. So if you want to build a farm building, I didn't feel like that should, it would be helpful for that tax on that farm building to be assisted as well. Morton buildings could be, $250,000.
I think current use already does that.
It might for farm buildings, but if your farm structure is on a section of your property that's not in current use, sometimes your curtilage is 2 acres, and that might be where your farm building is. It may not be on your acreage that your current use is on. And I might be wrong about that, but that's what I thought.
We can have some testimony on that, but I think that's.
Okay, thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Are you imagining that when municipalities vote for this exemption, that could also be exemption from the education property tax?
It seems to me that the town could opt in for either. It's a little bit unclear when I read the Lister's handbook. But essentially, we've had so much aggressive talk about housing that I think if that could be an option town by town to make that differential, that would be really exciting. I think some towns would certainly want to do that to encourage development because and some may not, but I don't know the ins and outs of that.
Thanks. Any other questions on this one? Yeah, Representative Anthony Van Demmer.
Your last question is rather difficult terrain because the dispensation, if it were granted to Woodstock, would override the general statute on it collections and submission of funds. That I would be very nervous about.
Yes, I understand.
I just another observation, and this is just my general professional background. Having not seen this issue coming in the sense of essentially a lot of serious money buying Vermont parcels and converting them in various ways, we have not exercised a forward thinking of our monopoly on regulatory authority. And now we're jumping in as if we have a big enough wallet to compete with a private equity outfit out of Los Angeles. And I don't think we do have a big enough wallet. And so it's almost no end to the money side of market intervention unless you really have a big wallet. The reason we're where we are is Vermont has a small wallet compared to people from Los Angeles. So I'm not sure that this strategy in general is going to achieve what we think or hope it will achieve.
Oh, sorry, Representative Demrow, Maslin, Sims, and then we are wrapping.
Do you get any sense of what percentage of the grand list value that would be, that exemption?
For our town, it's very, very minimal.
Interesting idea.
We have two ADUs that have been created so far, and we have several, 3 units that are being created and, a couple other ADUs coming down the pike.
Just with regards to the wallet, maybe not right now, but at some point, what is a big enough wallet? I mean, we can have that discussion at cafeteria or something.
I don't think the tax rate would be adoptable. That would make the wallet big enough.
All right, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do. I don't think we can like necessarily buy our way out of a housing crisis that we're in. And yet at the same time, talking to, developers in my community, too often the like capital stack, the like ROI on a project doesn't work out. But sometimes it like just doesn't work out a little. And I think there are places where like the right targeted assessment can make a difference for a project that wouldn't happen otherwise, and that we don't have to pay for the whole thing, but there are maybe targeted strategies where with our limited resources, we can do something. I'm curious, sorry, is this time limited or that you get that reduction in earnest value perpetuity?
You get it for 5 years.
5 years, okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, it's currently in statute for 3. We increased it by 5 just to put it with the ADU. Yeah.
There's some similarity to, I think, a mechanism that's in H 719, Act 50 housing bill that would, doesn't pick a dollar amount, but it would freeze your grand list value for 5 years while you created new units. So especially thinking about that, like dilapidated house in town that no one wants to take on, but if there was a 5-year freeze, might help accelerate the development, and we can get into the but-for arguments. But to me, it's, if things are stuck in the grand list in some certain way, we can actually help create more resources and value long-term by encouraging folks to add more value by offering a short-term incentive. Yeah, appreciate you bringing this idea forward. And hope we could keep moving on.
Thank you. I was excited to see that portion of that bill.
And towns do already have the ability to freeze local tax rates. It's generally done with farms rather than homes, but that's not, I don't think that's statutory that it has to be farms. Stowe does it actually. And so if I think one of the questions here is the ed fund and the impact on the ed fund, and well, we all know about that. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Appreciate you being here and being so thoughtful about tax policy in preparation for the session.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Representative Stone, would you like to join us? Thank you. Thank you all. So I believe we were talking about H610.
I am. We get it all pulled up. Representative Stone, Commitment 14 for the record. Thanks for having me. You'll find my testimony uploaded to your documents, and also some important testimony from some other people that came in this morning, including Representative Byron. I saw. Okay. Here to talk about H610. I'm a resident of Vermont, obviously, and a member of the sandwich generation, which means that I'm in this weird in-between phase where I am preparing to take care of children, hopefully fingers crossed in the future, but also taking care of aging parents. I'm also an occupational therapist, and as I was going over this testimony with someone last night, I realized a lot of people don't know what an occupational therapist is. So I'm just going to give a definition. We evaluate and treat people who have injuries, illnesses, or disabilities to help them with their daily living skills and promote independence. I personally work at a hospital to do that work. So through those lived experiences, including working as an OT, I am well versed in how costly home modifications are, and I'm also well versed in how prohibitive those costs can be as it relates to someone's ability to age in place and enjoy their lives to the fullest in the safest capacity. And therefore, I strongly urge you to take up this bill and do so swiftly. Illness and disability will affect everyone at some point in their lives, whether we want to admit that or not. All of us, regardless of our race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, zip code, or political affiliation, all of us, every single one of us sitting at this table. Throughout the course of our lives, we and our loved ones will likely need significant medical care that will exceed hundreds of thousands of dollars. And on top of that, we will likely have to make home modifications that can be incredibly burdensome, costing thousands of dollars depending on the needs of the home and person. This is not hypothetical. It's the world we live in, and it's a challenge that I've seen far too often in my 11 years of occupational therapy practice. Far too often, I find myself playing the role of a case manager in the sense that I'm calling local nonprofits, churches, friends, fellow legislators, and other colleagues to problem solve how to get my patients the home modifications they need to live safely, but also to be able to discharge from the hospital. I know our healthcare system is flawed and the gaps can be deep and wide. It's one of the reasons I ran for office after all. And I'm going to go off script here and talk about some stories. This past summer, I had to call not one, but two representatives to help get patients home from the hospital because they needed home modifications. They needed wheelchair ramps in order to be able to safely access their home so that I could write a safe discharge from the hospital order. Otherwise, I could not recommend that they go home because they couldn't access their home without those modifications. Modifications like wheelchair ramps are not covered by insurance. Modifications like bathroom equipment, even if you have a stroke and you cannot walk without an ambulatory device, grab bars, shower chairs, raised toilet seats, none of that is covered by insurance. A lot of people don't know that, and I think it's because the people who wrote those policies probably didn't have boots on the ground as a healthcare worker. And that comes from a federal, from a federal level, and those are conversations that I definitely will continue to have with our federal delegation. But I feel like this bill can and will help Vermonters. It would allow an individual to receive a tax credit up to $15,000 of qualified expenses in their lifetime with the purpose of helping individuals live more safely in their home. Qualifying expenses refer to unreimbursed and uncovered expenses related to modifying their homestead to enhance safety and livability. So things like ramps, lifts, widened doorways, bathroom renovations, and other modifications specifically made to improve accessibility or safety. In my testimony, I put some information about common home modifications that are often not reimbursable and their average cost. I pulled that information from Disability Partnerships, and I have that cited if you want to look on their website. I mean, this stuff adds up and it's really expensive. And if enacted, we would enjoy 8 other states. So we're not like plowing new ground here, including Maine and New Hampshire. So 2 of our neighbor states have already enacted policies like this, and I've put what they have in place. They're different. New Hampshire versus Maine versus what's in this bill. So, I would encourage you to take this bill up, take testimony. But this legislation would impact people living with disabilities to modify their homes in response to their diagnosis, but also people who are interested in making their homes more accessible. So that would have long-term positive impacts on our overall housing market. The financial impact of this bill's passage on people modifying home, especially with our aging population here in Vermont, would be significant, and it would incentivize families to invest in making their homes safer to live in. It would help people age in place and free up much needed space in our fragile healthcare systems that are already over capacity. For these reasons, I ask the committee to take up and pass this bill. Yeah.
Questions, thoughts? Medical supplies being essentially.
I'll just share a story from last summer and my own experience with this. I have a plumber in my town who begged me to come and help him put a new subfloor in some elderly folks' house in town. They had to have their whole bathroom redone because they couldn't use the accessible bathroom that was up on their second floor. And they could no longer get up the stairs. And I did the new subfloor for them, but what they really needed was a lift. And I was able to scrounge a lift, but it was a left-handed lift and they needed a right-handed to get up to their stairs, went up and turned. And, you know, these folks didn't have any money. I did the subfloor work for them for free and just didn't send them a bill. And I don't know how many other people there are like that in my district and in Vermont. But I'm sure there are lots and lots of them.
So many. I mean, I have tons and tons and tons of stories, and it's keeping people in the hospital because we can't discharge people home if they can't access their home. That's a perfect example of me as an OT. They need a bathroom. They have to access a bathroom. We can't send them home without that. And insurance isn't covering it. So this is a way I feel of like helping Vermonters to be able to age in place, return to their home, return to their communities.
I'm curious about the decision to exempt from income tax rather than including as covered under health insurance.
Exempt from,
Like the idea that you would give people an income tax rebate on these costs rather than trying to get these costs covered by health insurance. Like just
not covered.
I know, but you made a policy choice about which policy you thought would be more effective and why you didn't
'Cause this
pursue
is-
healthcare coverage.
because this is from a federal level. These are things that I have been talking with Bernie about since long before I even decided to run for office. These are things that are like talked about at tables that aren't here in the state house. And so this is a way to help Vermonters where they're at right now. But believe you me, I will continue fighting the fight on the Hill in DC. And I encourage y'all to join me because, like I said, a lot of people just don't know. You don't know these things until you have stories like Rep. Dimrow and you're like, what? I can't believe this is happening to my constituent, to my family, to my friends. So we need to just keep raising this issue. But for now, this is what a lot of other states are doing and what I feel like we should do in the interim.
I think, thanks for this idea. I think another version of that question is, the policy choice to make it a credit versus investing more in some of the home repair programs that we have now. I know the Rural Edge, the partner, nonprofit housing partner in my community, it has a home repair program. We could invest more in some of those existing programs versus adding income credit. So I guess again, curious to hear a little bit about why this tool.
Yeah, it's a yes and some of these things, like you think about it, if you broke your leg today, you're not going to need a grab bar for the rest of your life, but you may need it for a few months while you have a cast on. So it's not something that you're going to need someone to come in and like completely do. So some of these things are like, you're going to need lifelong things like a stair lift. That family may need that for the rest of that person's life. But for somebody who breaks their leg, they may just need a grab bar to like help them get out of the hospital and get discharged. And so I think that it has more flexibility and it's like, I don't know, a swifter way to help people where they're at any stage. But the programs you're talking about, yes, keep going forward. But I think that this would be a nice complement to those.
Is there any help from Medicaid for these situations?
I wish. You know how many letters I write and gets declined? No, there's not. All this stuff is stuff that's uninsured and uncovered. Everything in that list. It's ridiculous. Like I said, even if you have a stroke and you cannot walk like safely without falling, and I say you can't access your bathroom unless you have a shower chair because you literally cannot stand up in a shower. They say, sorry, that's out of pocket. And I'm having to call y'all, if it's your constituents, and say, hey, do you know if anybody has one that they could donate because this family doesn't have the means to do it and I really can't discharge them home if they don't have a place to go to the bathroom, bathe, etc. Yeah, it's not great, but yeah.
So somebody's Medicaid is keeping them in the hospital and helping to pay that bill.
I know, that's it. I think it's something just because when these decisions were made long ago, there wasn't somebody who was a healthcare worker perhaps sitting at the table helping with those policies. So it's a fight we're going to have to continue to fight. But in the meantime, let's keep Vermonters in their homes and keep them safely in their homes.
I do know there's other, I mean, there are other things that are covered by health insurance differently from state to state. So, you know, like mammograms, for instance, are covered in Vermont and not covered in New Hampshire. And so yes, thank you. And so I guess I'm just sort of curious, and I don't, you know, that's for the healthcare committee. I don't understand
I
how.
practiced in 3 states,
Yeah.
and this is true in all Alabama, Washington, DC, and here.
And I guess I don't know the levers to change it here. That's all I'm saying. Representative Anthony?
Just, I'm not clear, and I apologize for not having pre-read the bill, but what would be exempted and is it enough?
Yeah, I have a copy here. You want to extra look up too. So there you go. That would be something for you to take up in committee, but what I said is uninsured, things that are not covered. Qualified expensive means unreimbursed and uncovered expenses
Exempt from what, though? I'm not,
if it's not covered by their insurance. Which a lot of this stuff is not. Like a wheelchair ramp, I've never experienced an insurance that will cover a wheelchair ramp. Bathroom equipment, not happening.
but how would the incentive in this bill enable a person needy of those to be able to afford it?
That is a good point, but if they knew that they were getting the credit back, it would be more helpful than saying, just add that on to the thousands and thousands of dollars that you owe UVM Medical Center for your hospital stay.
So it's a refundable credit? Is that what I'm getting?
That's what it's a non-refundable.
It's written.
Non-refundable?
Yes. It's a credit, yes.
Then I'm back to my, is it enough? Because many people who are low income will not
something
receive
that I
a
would encourage.
refundable credit.
I'm sure the representative would be perfectly happy for us to make it refundable.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Yes, last question, and then we are going to wrap up this topic.
One, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I grew up in an era when, too bad, tough. But more to the point, Catherine's Rep. Simmons's point about tagging on with, home repair outfits in an area is an excellent idea. There are some in the Upper Valley that do that. And I realize that they're not widespread and they don't service everybody and they can't do everything, but using available resources is something part and parcel, that's whatever that I clearly support.
Yeah, like I said, I see that complementing things like that, right? Where you're like, okay, I want to put a grab bar in because this person has an impairment, or maybe they don't, and they just want to be proactive about aging in place so that if and when that day comes.
Yeah.
But having something to say you get a credit for doing that would be great.
One in the Upper Valley, they do ramps, they do bars, they do kitchen floors, they do basically this sort of stuff.
Habitat does it and Capstone does it.
Anyway, so.
Thank you very much for.
Yeah, thank you.
And we are going to take a break until 11, when we're going to hear the ethics charter change. Encourage folks who have not, people might have an email from Scotia reminding them to send in their bills that we voted on.